everybody. Welcome to That Expert Show, where you help run the show. I'm Anna Canzano. Thanks so much for joining us for this episode as we talk about organ donation. It's not really a topic that you think about in your daily life, but I am interested in it because I want to know what has changed about it. Maybe we can help you debunk some myths about it. If you have questions about organ donation that pop up in your head, feel free to post this if you're watching this live. Welcome to the viewers from the Oregonian as well. If you're joining us, would love to hear your comments and your questions on this topic for our featured guest today, who is the Executive Director of Donate Life Northwest. Jackie Wurst joins us live right now. Jackie, thanks so much for being on That Expert Show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Jackie, I think it's interesting that, often the first time that many of us are even thinking about the topic of organ donation is when we are like 15 or 16 years old and, about to get our driver's license, because that's when we're asked whether we're interested in being donors.
Yeah, I mean, it's such an exciting time in life. And then somebody asks you, would you like to be a donor? And in Oregon, so many of us choose to say yes to that question. But sometimes we don't necessarily understand all that goes into what it means to be an organ, eye, and tissue donor. So that's one reason why I'm here today, is to talk a little bit more about what it means, to share some information, debunk some myths, and hopefully get everybody excited about having a conversation about what it means to be an organ, eye, and tissue donor.
I would imagine that in the last couple of years with COVID, there had to have been some impact on the whole organ donation system because of the pandemic. Can you let us in on some of that insight?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, the good news is that despite the impact that pandemic had on all sorts of aspects of healthcare, overall, we actually saw a remarkably similar number of transplants across the country from 2019 to 2020 to 2021. And in fact, 2021 was a record-breaking year with more than 41,000 transplants.
Wow, that's incredible. And then when it comes to donation, it's interesting because you hear a lot of different myths about it. Probably the worst are sort of the urban myths when it comes to organ donation and the idea, of people getting their organs like stolen, for example. But I think that it's interesting that one of the more common myths too is that people are afraid that when they go into like a hospital setting, let's say they're in an emergent care situation, that the people who are in charge of their care, for example, in an ICU or an emergency room, that there's some kind of competing priority, that the people, that the doctors and the nurses that are charged with keeping you alive have some kind of vested interest in not actually keeping you alive because of the organ harvesting process. Is that something that you come across?
Yeah, that's a really common myth. And this is one that is perpetuated by some really gripping horror TV and movies that are out there. But the truth of the matter is that our healthcare professionals are 100% professionals. And when you go into the ER, when you're going into surgery or any kind of hospital situation, your healthcare practitioners are doing their best to save your life. And in fact, they don't have access to figure out if you are or are not an organ donor. The only people that have the ability to look that information up are members of the Cascade Life Alliance here in Portland. So if the circumstances are such that an individual passes away and is able to donate organs, the Cascade Life Alliance will have professionals that come in and will check for all of the necessary permissions. So the healthcare providers that are working with a patient in the ICU actually won't know if that patient is an organ donor, and it is only after that brain death or circulation death has been declared will that information come to light, and the donation professionals will come into play.
You said brain death or circulation death. I'm not sure what circulation death is. What is that?
In the rare circumstance when somebody has come in and there is a circulation death that may be imminent, that individual may still be able to donate organs. Now, one thing that is important when it comes to organ donation is that we want to make sure that oxygen is getting to those organs for as long as possible, because oxygen really is what keeps the systems running. So when it comes to circulatory death, if an individual is slowly in the process of undergoing circulatory death, they can have already pre-declared that they are going to be a donor. And then the circulatory death, when that moment happens, there's a variety of tests to make sure that things are appropriate. And at that point, they can still become an organ donor.
Oh, interesting. So when you say circulation, you mean like blood circulation, which is the vehicle through which the oxygen gets to the organ to keep it healthy enough to be a transplant.
Yes. And the vast majority of organ donors, however, actually come from what is called brain death, when the brain stem no longer is receiving enough oxygen for the brain to be viable. And in that situation, the patient is usually intubated, and that intubation process is ensuring that the organs are being perfused with oxygen, allowing for a healthy testing situation and being able to make sure that the organs are as healthy as possible for donation.
That's
But one
fascinating.
thing that we haven't talked about is living donation. So you do not have to be deceased in order to become a donor. You can, in fact, donate tissue and some organs while you're alive. Now, most famously, you can donate a kidney because you were born with a spare. So this is one of the most heartwarming stories in healthcare today, is the idea that a loved one or even a complete stranger can altruistically donate a kidney to an individual while they're living. And this is something that is creates such a tremendous sense of community, and it's wonderful that we have the ability to donate kidneys. Total of 15% of all kidneys that are donated come from living donors.
Now, one of the first things that I think of in that situation is, yes, we're born with a spare, but I would be reticent to donate a kidney unless it was like a loved one, because I would want to have that spare available to me should something go wrong with my own kidneys.
That is completely understandable. However, we're also born with an appendix, and that really doesn't do much of anything at all for us. So, when it comes to that second kidney, a vast majority of humans are able to live quite long, successful, and happy lives with a single kidney. And one of the things that happens if you are interested in becoming a living donor is you go through a lot of tests to make sure that you are healthy enough to be a donor, that you have a healthy lifestyle that will allow you to live a full, fulfilled life with a single kidney. So there's a lot of things that need to be accomplished before you can dash off and donate a kidney to ensure that you will be able to have, do all the things that you want to do with that single kidney.
I'm sure that one of the things that you also hear from folks is, oh, I'm too old. They're not going to want my organ, that could probably be said for a lot of people of any age. Like they're like, oh, they're not going to want my organs because I'm like 50, 60, 70 years old. My organs are too old and not ideal for transplant. Is that another myth that you run into in your work?
Absolutely. People can donate organs and tissues throughout their entire lifespan, everybody from newborns to great grandmothers. And in fact, some organs and tissues are actually aging like wine, like fine wine. So, skin, when you're a little bit older, is actually better for transplantation than if you are a younger individual. So, never rule yourself out as being a potential organ, eye, or tissue donor. One of the most common methods by which people become a donor is through corneas. And corneas are able to be donated up to 24 hours after an individual passes away. They are avascular, which means that there is no blood flow that's going to the cornea, which means that you don't have to worry about blood type matching or any of those other things that complicate things like kidney donation. So that means that oftentimes individuals, regardless of age, are able to donate a cornea and save thousands of lives. In the state of Oregon in 2021, over 1,800 cornea transplants were made possible by cornea donors.
Wow, that's incredible. Does cornea donation have the same kind of fragility that other organ transfers encounter?
Actually, no. Corneas are amazingly resilient organs, and they can be collected many, many hours after death, which is directly opposite of some of the organs that we tend to think of when we think of organ donation. So, when it comes to a heart, you have 3 to 4 hours after the heart has been donated to have it transplanted into its recipient. Kidneys can go for up to 24 hours, but the cornea needs to simply be gathered within 24 hours, and then it can be stored in special solutions for up to a year before the cornea transplant.
That's
And what's
crazy.
amazing about the cornea transplant is, and I've talked to eye surgeons about this, is that the eye surgeons can say, oh, yeah, I'm doing this surgery that's coming up. I would like a cornea that is of this size, this many cells deep. They can get really specific because there is this wealth of cornea available, and that is giving the gift of sight to so many.
Wow, that is amazing. I mean, when you sit back and you just kind of think about the medical science that has advanced to this point, that's really kind of mind blowing. Um, can we talk about? I mean, so sounds like you've got a good supply of corneas, but there's a whole other issue when it comes to the supply of available organs for living transplants or for people who have expired. Um, can we talk a little bit about ethnicity and how that factors into a system that, as it stands right now, is really unfortunate for certain races?
Yes. Oh, excuse me. So right now there are 106,000 people that are on the waiting list for an organ. And of those 106,000 people, 60% of them come from minority groups, Black, Hispanic, Asian American. That is disproportionate to the representation in the general population. Now, the reasons behind this are complex, but oftentimes we can think about this in terms of the systemic racism that has resulted in disparate health outcomes. So, lack of access to affordable health care, resulting in higher incidences of obesity or diabetes, lots of end stage kidney failure, which is 3 times more likely to occur in the Black American population and 1.5 times more likely to occur in the Hispanic American population than in the Caucasian population. So, all of these things that come together for a lifetime of health disparities lead to this disparity in who is in need of organ transplant. And then when we look at the actual transplantation itself, oftentimes ethnic minority groups share, for example, B type blood, which is one of the more rare types of blood. There is A, B, O, and you can have AB blood, and you can also have positive and negative factors to your blood. Well, a vast majority of Black, Hispanic, and Asian Americans have the B blood type, which is more rare. And that means that they are going to have to wait longer in order to receive an eligible transplant. So the wait times are longer for underrepresented minority groups on the transplantation group.
Hmm.
Now, there are a lot of discussions currently happening right now about how to address these serious inequities in healthcare. And everything from how we're defining the geographic area that organ transplantation matches are made in, all the way down to the calculations that go into determining subjects' health viability. All of these issues are being discussed and publicly debated. And this is one of the things about transplantation and donation community that I greatly enjoy, is the fact that patient voice is also incredibly important in addition to the healthcare providers. So patient voice is something that is helping make and change policies, making transplantation more equitable in the United States.
Is there something to these minority groups and just sort of and their cultures? Like, is there a barrier there toward the idea of organ donation that ties into their cultural beliefs and maybe, I don't know, I'm just like distrust of the system?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Now, of course, any single ethnic minority group is not a monolith, so there's always going to be a lot of diversity within a given culture. However, there are several studies that have shown some consistent themes. In the Black American population, there is oftentimes a deep distrust of the medical system. This is born out of a history, a very, very long history of ethical violations perpetuated against Black Americans. And it is not surprising that there is a misunderstanding and a belief that healthcare may not be working in their favor. So, because of that, Black Americans are less likely to engage in healthcare and seeking out care if they are experiencing problems that could eventually lend them to being on, for example, the kidney waiting list. For cultures like Asian American culture, family is huge. And so we often think about this decision to become an organ donor as something that we do independently as 16-year-olds at that DMV moment. But in fact, for many people culturally, this is a family discussion. And the idea of having a family discussion about a health incidents or a health occurrence that may involve death, having that conversation can be tremendously difficult to have with a family unit. So that is one reason why having that conversation about donation is something that we need to have. And we need to have this conversation in a culturally aware and sensitive way.
Help me remember, and you might have said this, and so apologize if I missed it, but when you go to the DMV to get your driver's license and you indicate that you want to be an organ donor, is that the only step that you need for this to happen? Or like, do you need to take a secondary step and let family and friends know that that is your intent?
Well, legally, all you need to do is indicate your willingness to be an organ, eye, and tissue donor through either the DMV, on the iPhone iHealth app, or online at donatelifenorthwest.org. Any of those options are ways that you can sign up to be an organ, eye, and tissue donor. However, we do strongly encourage people to have the conversation with their family. If your family is unaware, this is something that we want to avoid having an awkward conversation. We want everybody to be aware and supportive so that in a moment of crisis for a family, this is not coming as a surprise. So at Donate Life Northwest, we believe that the conversation is almost more important than the actual decision itself, because the conversation not only is something that helps really make clear to your family what your intent is, but it's also expressing to your family the care and concern that you have for the health and well-being of your family and your community. And it also raises awareness so that more people can have conversations and consider the health and life-giving benefits of donation.
I think it's interesting that one of the ideas kind of being kicked around in your circles is the idea that becoming an organ donor would be an opt-out process, meaning that everybody would automatically be an organ donor, and in order to not be one, you would have to opt out of that system. And the idea that that would, increase the supply and it would become just kind of like part of the system in which we live.
Yes, so that is actually a really fascinating topic of conversation. There has been legislation that's been introduced in several states across the nation that have proposed an automatic opt-in situation where you would have to go to the DMV and opt out of being a designated organ, eye, or tissue donor. Now, this is something that has not been proposed in the state of Oregon and is something that it's difficult to really comprehend all the ramifications behind that type of switch and how we're thinking about donation. As I mentioned, Donate Life Northwest is a huge proponent of having that conversation. And if we had an automatic opt-in, that does, in many respects, bypass that conversation. And we feel that that conversation is good not only for helping people come to the decision about whether they want to be a donor, but it's also good to have a conversation about community health health and well-being. So when it comes into automatic opt-in, I think that in the state of Oregon, we have one of the highest donor designation rates in the country already. We are doing fabulously as Oregonians. And my ask would be that we instead focus on having conversations with our community to continue that good work.
Why do you think that is, that Oregon has such a high rate of donors?
I think it's just because we're intrinsically amazing people. I I love Oregonians. I think there's something about the connection to, we have the connection to nature. We are a small state with a big heart. And I think the fact that we live in communities that care for each other and that we hear stories about my uncle who needed a kidney or my cousin who became a donor, those stories can resonate throughout all of the state of Oregon. And so I think that's one reason why we are really wonderful at signing up to be donors.
I want to ask you one last thing before we leave. Well, two things actually. One would be, if you can break it down for us, one person deciding to donate their organs, what is the potential impact of that donation?
One individual can impact over 125 lives with that gift of life, sight, and health. So we have our major organs: heart, lungs, kidney, pancreas, intestines. We have tissues like nerves, arteries, cartilage, skin, all sorts of different tissues there, as well as the cornea and the eye. And overall, 125 people can be impacted. And that's a lot. So when you think about the fact that this is not just a gift, it is a gift of health. If you are on dialysis and needing a kidney, every day feels like the worst day because your health is intrinsically not there. So giving somebody the gift of breaking free from a dialysis routine that eats up 4 days of their week and makes them feel weak and confused and not their best, that gift is so priceless. And the fact that you can give that gift 125 times over, that is why I'm excited to do the work that I do.
That's incredible. One last thing too. I keep saying one last thing, but I'm closing, I promise. One of the things that I wonder if people are concerned, some people might be concerned that becoming an organ donor means that, for example, at the end of life, you might not want an open casket funeral because of what is harvested from your body. Is that something that you can speak to?
Oh, yes, absolutely. So when you donate an organ, eye, or tissue, you are absolutely able to have an open casket funeral. The professionals that are performing the organ extraction, they do a wonderful job and work very closely with funeral homes to make sure that the individual is presented in a way that falls in lines with the wishes of their family. So it is absolutely possible to have an open casket funeral, and it is absolutely possible to really honor that loved one, both visually as well as in acknowledging the gift that they have given through donation.
Okay, got it. Thank you for clearing that up for us. And finally, what's something that has stuck with you? I know you haven't been on the job for that long, but what is one of the stories that has really stood out to you as you've taken on this position as executive director?
So one of the great privileges that I had when I first came on board was helping with the premiere of our documentary, A Donation Conversation. And in A Donation Conversation, there are interwoven so many stories of families, of loved ones, of the professionals that are working on behalf of donation. But one story that really stands out to me is that of Dash. And Dash is an individual that is on the waiting list for a kidney. And he was talking about his love of camping and his love of the outdoors that was instilled in him by his father growing up in Oklahoma, and how now, as he waits here in the state of Oregon, he's actually unable to go camping because he has to come back for dialysis. The dialysis routine is running his life. And at that point, I just started really thinking about the fact that Dash is unable to live this life that he has so greatly enjoyed growing up and wants to get back to so badly. And so, for all the people, the thousands of people, the 106,000 people that are waiting on that list, what I would like to close with is the thought that 106,000 people, it's enough to fill Autzen and Reser Stadium combined. But with 3 million registered donors in the state of Oregon, we can do it. We can help make a difference in so many lives.
That's fantastic. Jackie, thanks so much for sharing that and for sharing your wisdom and your insight with us on this topic.
Thank you so much for having me.
Interesting stuff. I know it's a little morbid there at the end, but I've just got to ask the questions, that are applicable. Thanks so much for being on this episode of That Expert Show, or for joining us. We do put all of our content out as a podcast as well. So if you prefer to listen to your content, just look for us, That Expert Show, on wherever it is that you listen to podcasts. You can go and check out our previous episodes as well on our YouTube channel. Just go to thatexpertshow.com and you can look through all the experts that we've talked with over the years. I am always interested in hearing from you. You give me the best ideas on who to interview, the topics to go after. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Just look for Anna Canzano. Thanks so much for being on the show. We are live on Monday nights in partnership with The Oregonian. And you really do help drive the show with your comments and your questions and your input. It is called That Expert Show, and it's where you help run the show.